They're not behaving.
Today's sanctions really represent a very, very strong stand against the actions that Iran has been taking. I would never rule anything off the table.
This is truly reckless because this is a country that could start World War III.
I don't want a war with Iran, but they deserve to be sanctioned.
This is dicey what he's doing, and I think he has to understand that words of a president, or for that matter, the tweets of a president, actually carry a lot of weight.
That's an important step. We've seen that done in the past, and where you have new players, you need to crack down on it.
Iran sanctions put in place by President Trump and the Trump administration. This as a U.S. Navy destroyer makes a move into the Red Sea, the USS Cole. A lot of people remember that name from the destroyer that came under attack off the coast of Yemen. This comes after a number of provocations by Iran, 16 actually, since signing the UN nuclear agreement in July 2015. At least 5 ballistic missile tests, 4 under President Obama, 1 under President Trump, 1 what's called highly provocative rocket test, 7 incidents of harassment with the U.S. military in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, and those, of course, those fast boats confronting U.S. Navy vessels. Let's start here on foreign policy with the Trump administration and bring in our panel from Washington tonight. Steve Hayes, editor-in-chief of the Weekly Standard, Lisa Booth, columnist with the Washington Examiner, and Tim Farley, host and managing editor of Morning Briefing POTUS on Sirius XM Radio. Okay, Steve, this action by the administration, obviously these had been planned as an option under the Obama administration, but deployed under the Trump administration.
Well, and thank goodness, this is such a long time overdue. If you think back about the way that Iran has behaved over the past decade, whether you're talking about deliberately targeting and killing U.S. personnel in Iraq and Afghanistan, whether you're talking about funding a variety of terrorist groups, whether you're talking about providing what Osama bin Laden himself called the main artery for al-Qaeda, whether you're talking about providing support for Palestinian terrorist groups, the provocations that you mentioned, any of a number of reasons that we can point to over the past decade that has allowed Iran to establish itself as the foremost state sponsor of terror in the world, means that these actions are wildly overdue. When was the last time that you heard anybody stand at the White House podium, as General Flynn did the other day, and suggest that what Iran was doing was wrong? We just haven't heard that for 8 years, and it's long overdue. I'm glad that we had this kind of forceful statement. I think the Trump administration is exactly right to do this. And what's so shocking to me is that you would have objections from Democrats like Chris Murphy. I mean, it's hard to imagine having anybody have a problem with scolding the Iranian regime, given what we've seen the regime do in its hostility toward the United States over the past decade, really longer.
You know, Lisa, if you don't think that the monitoring Twitter is important. Today, we read a lot of tweets because the president tweets. Today, there was international tweeting going on. President Trump tweeting, Iran is playing with fire. They don't appreciate how kind President Obama was to them, not me. 20 minutes later, the Iran foreign minister tweets, Iran unmoved by threats as we derive security from our people. We'll never initiate war, but we can only rely on our own means of defense. And then we will never use our weapons against anyone except in self-defense. Let us see if any of those who complain can make the same statement. Pretty interesting back and forth.
Yeah, it is. And look, President Trump is in the infancy of his administration, so I think it's important for him to set the tone, particularly in regards to Iran. And look, anyone who thought that this theory that somehow Iran was going to temper their behavior because of the Iran deal has been completely dispelled by the provocations we've seen, as you spelled out earlier in the show, just this most recent testing of a ballistic missile, and not to mention the fact that just 2 weeks after implementation day of the deal, we saw the Iranians put our sailors on their knees and shoot it for propaganda purposes. And how did the United States respond to that? We responded by a $1.7 billion ransom, purchasing heavy water, having the Obama administration encouraging businesses to re-engage in the Iranian marketplace. So yeah, this is a big, strong message that the Trump administration is sending. And as Steve pointed out earlier, I think it's one that is welcomed and needed.
Yeah, Tim, you know, the Democrats have said that they are going to fight and resist on a number of fronts. Take a listen to, and you heard Steve mention Senator Murphy. Here's also Senator Warner reacting to foreign policy Trump style.
I'm not sure what he means by putting Iran on notice. Is this similar to the Obama red line in Syria? I don't know what that means, and none of us up here on the Hill have gotten any kind of assessment from the administration of putting him on notice.
For somebody that advertised himself as being a strong president on foreign policy, let's just look at the context here. Nobody's afraid of this guy. The Russians literally, within hours of the phone call between Putin and Trump, started advancing on eastern Ukraine.
I mean, there's two different messages there. He's either too ominous and too forceful, or they don't know what it is, and it's like Obama's red line.
Yeah, exactly. It almost sounds like a couple of Republicans talking about President Obama not dealing with the red line in Syria. I think one thing that came out today, aside from what we heard on Iran, was also General Mattis and what he said about North Korea. And then we heard Nikki Haley, the ambassador to the United Nations this week, saying the United States was going to be very strong in its dealing and was going to support Ukraine. I think the point here is not so much about what Mr. Trump is saying, because he has typically in the past said that he doesn't want to show his hand. He's sort of showing his hand, but maybe not, because you don't know exactly what he's going to do. But obviously he has set down a marker. The question is, what are the circumstances under which you will deal with that marker that you've set down, and what are you going to do? And it's not so much what he has said right now, I think, although a lot of people are paying attention to it, the tweets are flying. It's what's going to happen, what kind of action he takes. And now he has set up an expectation, I think, to be tough. He has to make sure that whatever he does afterwards is equally as tough and it matches the rhetoric that he's using.
Steve, I just want to touch briefly on the settlements, the Israeli settlements, and the statement out today that new settlements are not welcome as far as moving towards peace, but the old settlements essentially don't factor into that. Can you read between the lines here where this administration is coming down on Israeli settlements?
Well, no, actually, I think there is some confusion on where this administration has come down on the settlements, unlike what we heard about Iran. I mean, I think if you go back, just to make a quick point to follow up on Tim's point, if you go back to what Senator Warner said, that he doesn't know what it means precisely to put Iran on notice. Well, what it means, we can say with certainty, is that the 8 years of accommodationist policy towards Iran is over. We know that much. Now, on the settlement question, I think it's much less clear. You heard Sean Spicer address that from the podium today. You've had indications, I think, pointing in a number of different directions. This is one of the hazards, I think, of sometimes doing policy by Twitter or doing it in short bursts, is some of these problems are complicated enough that it requires more explanation than you're allowed to give or you're capable of giving in short outbursts.
Yeah. Not a lot of nuance in 140 characters, but clearly the issue is different than in the Obama administration.